Hi everyone, I'm Robin, and if you're interested in starting to make wine and have never done it before, I'm going to give you my recommendations for how to get started. Now, first and foremost, wine is an alcoholic beverage produced from fermented fruit. Oftentimes when we think of wine, we think of what we pick up at the liquor store or the grocery store, where it's derived from wine grapes. But wine can be made from any type of fruit. And oftentimes when I make wine, it is fruit wine, and usually the end goal is to make brandy. And making wine is simple because it is just fermented fruits. So here's how to get started. First, ask yourself why you want to make wine. If it's because you are interested in taking on a new hobby and you want to do a fun activity where you get to experiment, and the outcome is that you now have an alcoholic beverage that you get to enjoy and share with friends, then great. If you want to make wine because you think it's going to save you money, then that's not exactly the best motive to start making wine, because it is really time consuming, and time is money, of course. And you do have to make the investment of buying some of the equipment. So that leads me to my next point. You do need to get the basic equipment in order to start making wine. Now, there's a variety of wine kits that you can get that will include the equipment. Some of them will also include the ingredients to start your first batch. And they also include recipe books and instructions that kind of make it foolproof. Liquor.com has a list of the 10 best wine kits to get in 2022 if you want to check that out for recommendations. But if you're just interested in picking up the bare minimum equipment, I would suggest a handful of things. Of course, you are going to need a fermentation vessel. I would recommend getting 2 fermentation vessels, because with wine, you are going to re-rack from your primary fermentation vessel to a secondary fermentation vessel. And the type of fermentation vessel that you're gonna get is gonna depend on your budget and your fermentation capacity. How much wine do you want to make? Again, some of these wine making kits will come in a variety of capacities, anywhere from like 1 gallon up to 6 gallons, sometimes even more. I use buckets for my fermentations when they're 5 gallons, but I also have, thanks to my friend Chelsea, a bunch of 1 gallon jars that I use for fermentations for much smaller batches. Next, I would suggest getting a hydrometer. This way you can understand how the sugar content is going to impact the alcohol that you get in the end. So you can measure how much potential alcohol you're going to get once it's fully fermented out. And you can kind of monitor that throughout the entire process. Hydrometers are like $20. So yeah, I would recommend getting one of those. I would also recommend getting a transfer hose or a siphon or a bottling wand, something like that, where there's an easy way for you to transfer your wine from one vessel to the other and from the other vessel into bottles. I have a hose that I just use as a siphon, and when it comes to bottling, I'll usually just pour the wine into the bottles using a funnel. So you can put funnel on the list too, or if you have one already around. But again, a lot of the kits will come with this auto siphon with a bottling wand that you can attach to it as well. You'll also want to pick up some sanitizer. Sanitization is really important in winemaking and beer making, because if there are other microbes that get involved in your fermentation, you're going to throw off the flavors. For me, I don't really focus too highly on sanitization, because again, a lot of the wine that I'm making is going to make brandy, or a lot of the beer that I'm making is going to make whiskey. And those wild microbes that start playing along will add an additional layer of flavors. However, if you're going to keep the beer as beer and the wine as wine, there's a potential for spoilage, and then your beer and wine isn't going to taste as great. So sanitizer is an important thing to pick up. You will also want some wine bottles for bottling your wine in the end. And again, pay attention to the capacity that you're going to be producing. If you're producing a 1-gallon batch, you only need about 5 bottles, 750 milliliter bottles. Whereas if you're producing a 5-gallon batch, you're going to need about 25. And finally, you'll need your ingredients, of course. Now, my biggest recommendation for if you are new to making wine or brewing is to start with a wine base. This means that you don't have to pay attention to any of those other additives, such as adjusting the pH or adding in tannins or adding in nutrients for your fermentation. This kind of takes care of it. So all you're doing is taking this wine base, adding water to it, and adding yeast and letting it go. Vintner's Best is the only wine base that I've used because they produce a variety of fruit wine bases. However, if you're looking to make more of a conventional wine from grapes, I've seen the brands Fontana and Wild Grapes recommended for those. Again, these wine bases will also include instructions, and a lot of them will suggest the types of yeast to use with the wine base. The other ingredient you need is yeast, and there are a wide variety of wine yeast that you can choose from. This is fun because you get to play around with different wine yeast. That leads me to the next point of what type of wine do you want to make? Do you want to make more of a conventional wine from grapes, or do you want to make a fruit wine? And my recommendation would honestly be to start with a fruit wine. You're going to have less of these preconceived notions of what it should taste like, so it might be a little bit more enjoyable, especially while you're getting a hang of the winemaking hobby. And again, depending on what type of wine and what style of wine you're going for, that's going to impact your yeast choice. Now, once you've done that, used a wine base to produce some wine, you've shared it with your friends, and you've decided that this hobby is still fun and you're ready to graduate to the next level, I would recommend moving on to using fruit juices or fruit juice concentrates instead of just going straight to using fruits. This will remove the need for you to extract the juice from these fruits yourself. It's already starting as a juice, and you get to get a feeling for what types of additives need to be added into your wine or your fermentation, right? Are you adding in some acid to adjust the pH? Are you adding in some tannins? Are you adding in nutrients? Things like that. At this point, you can also play around with making mead, right? This is wine made from honey, and the same things apply. And then once you get a hang of that, it's a really easy transition to move to fruits themselves, the actual whole fruits, because all you have to do, the next step, is just extracting the juice from those fruits. All right, guys, so that's it. Those are my recommendations for how to get started making wine at home if you've never done it before. Ultimately, it's keep everything super simple. You don't need all the fancy equipment. Get the bare minimum and make it really, really easy. Don't start with the whole fruits. Don't try to extract the juice yourself. Start with a wine base, and you can continue to progress and graduate to new levels of winemaking. Before I go, I want to give a huge shout out to the Patreons. Thank you guys so much for helping to support the channel. And if you, the viewer, would like to help support the channel, you can join our community over on Patreon. And just subscribing and giving this video a thumbs up and sharing it with friends also helps to support the channel. So if you enjoyed this video, you can do that. And let me know in the comments if you have any specific questions at all. Yeasts. So if you enjoyed the video.
Bye.